First off, a response video to the Modern Mystics Long Goodbye video, which is a very good video. I don't entirely agree with the conclusion as stated. I mean, I'm not optimistic that we can find a mechanism to prevent what he's saying, but I'm not convinced it's inevitable, and I'm certainly not convinced how exactly civilization will be destroyed. I mean, how much of a human animal will be left after the destruction of our peak. In other words, I mean, I don't know whether we will annihilate ourselves and life on Earth, or just knock ourselves back into the Stone Age, where we will just re-evolve again into civilization. To repeat again, perhaps, the same sort of collapse. Maybe we'll go through a few of those before we eventually do ourselves in completely as a race, as a kind, as a life form. But I sort of like where the conversation's going, because we're getting close to unifying a couple of different topics. I think. You know, I've done the video on morality and these videos on civilization, and the two are kind of connected, because once you can define a morality or ethics that is universal, then you can apply systems to problems that will have a higher degree of efficiency and won't be subject to these self-serving definitions of fairness, the biases that exist in our system. We'll perhaps be able to define and describe and shape a truly fair game that creates rules that are almost unnecessary, in the sense that people will see the fairness and comply with it because the fairness will exist. You won't have to enforce the rules, because most, or the vast majority, will obey the rules because they'll understand the rules. But anyway, so staying on the civilization line, which is really a video in opposition to the anarchist, Steph Bot did a new video that was really shows that this, you know, well, number one, the guy's, you know, I'm not, you know, I can say the guy is crazy, and that's a pretty purposeless, pointless thing to say, but you've got to wonder. He's opposed to Ron Paul merely because Ron Paul is a half solution. And it's his argument that a half solution is, in essence, worse than no solution. And this is in the face of you know, his proposal of implementing a system that would be a hugely radical change, an incomprehensible change. There's no way even to imagine how you take a society of 3 million people and convert it to anarchism in a year, in 10 years, in 100 years. It's a daunting prospect to figure out how you would divvy up property, and how you would create these institutions, these private institutions that we're going to do, you know, create all this civilization, you know, through in essence competing mobs. But anyway, it's whatever. It's nonsense to begin with, and it's super nonsense when somebody isn't even willing to accept a half solution, which a Ron Paul would be. I'd say it's an evil solution, but it's still halfway to the anarchism people are advocating, the economic anarchism. So anyway, the other side to this is Nick's argument that we can't survive because there's always this problem that no one's going to accept making rules. No one's going to make rules because there's never going to be an objective rule maker. They're always going to be elected, or there's always going to be built into the structure some corruption that's going to destroy the capacity to have an agreement that everybody can live by. And I would argue that there are examples, you know, different fishing industries especially, you know, I mean, the lobster population was getting depleted, so they made an agreement. So you had to buy, you got a lottery basically. If you entered the lottery, you got a right to so many pounds of lobster you could fish, blah, blah, blah. They've done other resources that get depleted, and they've been made agreements, and the agreements basically get complied with. People do cheat, but there is enforcement and the rest of it, and so it does seem to work. They've saved resources that way. And then on an international level, obviously, you could say that some species have been saved because of international agreements. Unfortunately, the bulk of our agreements have to do with trade and other bullshit, but there's certainly no impediment to us creating international agreements that are fair, that we can all live with. The Kyoto stuff, I don't think was very artfully written. I don't think it was an agreement that people could comply with, because it did have a lot of self-interest built into it. It wasn't a very good description of a fair fight or a fair reaction to the circumstance. It didn't require a fair distribution of sacrifice. And of course, as the problem gets more obvious, then there's going to be more willingness to make such agreements, though. And so the fact that we even got as close as we did to an international agreement on greenhouse gases is promising. It failed, but it came close. And so I don't think Nick's right that there's no way to get around the problem. It just requires there to be institutions in government, or people in government, capable of doing the honorable thing, which is their job to do, which is to really construct and implement these things we call laws, which are really rules of fairness. That's all ultimately we're looking for. So I would argue that it's doable. Obviously, in current circumstances, the politics doesn't make it look very doable, because they're just liars and crooks. Everybody's paid off by the capitalist, and that's why I guess there's a video response by Bratex sort of, his line is that we have to abandon capitalism. I probably agree with him, but I wouldn't word it that way, just because that sounds like saying something like we have to adopt communism or something. I don't think the alternative, I don't think, it's a word game. I've used and explained my incentive economics. I think you can still have economics where everybody has a will and desire to do their best and to be rewarded fairly for it, but you take away the extremes. You take away the you provide a minimum that people can live at, and then if they choose to do extra, they choose to work, they can have a better life. But they're not allowed to create burdens. So say if you're a poor person, you wouldn't be allowed to create children. There would be rules that would say these are the limits on what kind of burden we will provide for you, but you cannot create any extra burden. You cannot perpetuate your unproductivity. And at the top extreme, there would be a limit saying that, yes, you're not going to inherit your wealth, and wealth over a certain limit there's just no point in any one individual having that control, so it will be fed back into the system. So yeah, it's draconian economics to some, but it's not communism. I would never advocate that it be enforced on people undemocratically, and so I'm not going to accept a label of being called a communist. It's nonsense. But it's a good point, because that's really where we have to get to. We have to get to a system that encourages that everybody's a player, that everybody has, that there are personally felt implications for their contribution, their reality in the world. And that's where this sort of starts to connect to an objective definition of morality, because morality really has to do with productivity. It has to do with your effect, your contribution to the world around you, to the society you live in. That's what makes something moral or immoral. And well, I don't want to do the morality video. I'll wait till tomorrow just in case there are some replies to the other video I did. So let's try to stay on the idea of civilization and what the fact that the laws can be more perfectly written. There's all these people out there that just want to blow the system up, and it's so stupid because the system can be fixed. I'm running out of time. That I can't fix.